With Alan W. Watts.
Yes, they are different, but they are also inseparable. And this is true of almost everything in the world, because we distinguish things from their background. We distinguish one side from another as we distinguish up from down. Now imagine what would happen if we arranged everything in this set, or tried to arrange everything, so that nothing were down, everything had to be up. If we could really, in nature, separate the up from the down, why, we couldn't do it. Because up goes with down, is unintelligible apart from down, in the same way that the head side of a coin goes together with the tail side. And so in this way, we as individuals, as separate beings, are really inseparable from the whole natural environment in which we live. We go together, and you cannot have the one without the other. Without what we call things, there would be no world. But without what we would call the whole world, there would be no things. You know what happens when you think, well, we've got a lot of mosquitoes around here, all kinds of insects that bite us and bother us. Let's get rid of them. So we bring in the DDT and we send an aeroplane over and spray the whole surrounding territory with DDT. And what happens? Suddenly we find that other insects or other pests which those insects we destroyed were feeding upon multiply and increase, and we have a new problem. We have to get rid of those. It's like when they brought rabbits into Australia because they thought they'd be useful there for some reason or other. The rabbits multiplied because there was nothing that fed on rabbits. Then they had a plague of rabbits. You see, you cannot just push nature around. You cannot regard it as something to be attacked so that you can grab bits from it and shove it around any old way as if it were a machine that you could bang around like a mechanic. Indeed, even machines, as any good mechanic knows, are not that simple to play with. But if we do not see that our view of the separateness of the world is based on a convention of thinking, it exists, as it were, in here. It doesn't exist out here in actual concrete reality. And if we are confused, then we jump to follow our thoughts instead of our senses. And this is no sense.
The first thing that I want to do is analyze the claim that Alan Watts just made. He said that we and the environment go together. Claim one was W is we and E is for environment, go together. We in English, of course, is just the pronoun that includes you, which could be the singular or plural form. So I'm just going to imagine the plural form to encapsulate all of the human species. And me, which of course means a lot of things to a lot of people. So one convenient way to break this apart is to talk about it the way that Alan Watts usually talks about it. So my goal here is to talk about me in the same way that Alan Watts talks about me. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you his usage and what he is not trying to get it confused with. So in one sense, me is the physical and distinct human organism. So literally, you see my hand? Yes, that is an example of the physical and distinct human organism of me.
If we take a look at ourselves from another point of view, for example like this, we shall find that we are not one thing at all. We're an extraordinary number of things. What other points of view could we take to ourselves? We could, of course, take the sociologist's point of view, where we're not really a thing at all, but a sub-member of a group. Or still more, if a man visiting us from another planet in something like a flying saucer were to hover down and look at what sort of creature is inhabiting this earth, what would he see? Let's take a look and get some idea of his view. This is the kind of creature he would find inhabiting this planet. A sprawly, nubbly thing with various lines connecting bits of it. That would be, in his view, the kind of thing that we are. For you see, how many things we are depends upon the point of view which one takes.
But me is also used in another way to talk about the abstract sense of my personal outlook, my biographical narrative, from birth till now, maybe my different kinds of titles and status, my social security number, all these numbers that identify me in the social context. And maybe I go by Mr. or Doctor or agent, real estate agent, or teacher or father or sibling of, or whatever your title is, whatever your job title or your current social narrative is. There's a sense in which you are a sort of distinct abstract entity that maybe you couple with a sort of actual feeling that you associate with consciousness, but it really is not to be properly associated with consciousness, because consciousness is so much more than those sensations, but you're kind of just perhaps localizing into, a facial strain. When you say, try to pull myself together, there's a way that feels. Okay, so not to go too deep down that rabbit hole, me, we're referring to the physical and distinct human organism. We know that Alan Watts later on wants to say that you're physical and you're distinct, but distinct does not mean separate, that somehow physically you are actually inseparable, not separate. So separate and distinct mean two different things to Alan Watts, from what I understand. On the one hand, separable means that there is actually some real separation in the physical universe between the organism and the environment.
In terms of that kind of measurement that we call thought, we can separate the one from the other. We can talk about up as different from down. We can talk about one thing as different from other things. But in actual experience, it can't be done.
That they really are different fundamental things. But distinct just means that as human beings in this inseparable world, we have a sense, a sort of maya that we impose on the world, a grid-like matrix, if you will, that allows us to chop the wiggly world into things.
Just as in actual experience, that wiggly line was a continuous line and not a series of points.
So we chop the world into things. Philosophers are constantly giving specialized terms to already existent ideas and refining through analysis those ideas. Distinction is not separability. So physical and distinct human organisms. And then we look at the claim. Claim number one, W and E, so we and the environment go together.
We go together.
Go together, he means in some sense that we need to get clear on. So let's look at claim number two. Come back to it. You can't have one without the other.
And you cannot have the one without the other.
You can't have, so the implications there are, you can't have W without E. You can't have we without the environment. You can't have E without W. You can't have the environment without we. And again, remember, we were talking about you and me. Without me, without you, there is no environment. Without the environment, there is no we, you and me. When we say that you can't have one without the other, what is he referring to? Is he saying that you can't have we without the environment? You can't have I'm just going to start saying the physical organism, because that's what we mean, right? So you can't have the physical organism without the environment. What does he mean you can't have? Like, it can't exist? It cannot exist in the physical universe?
If we could really, in nature, separate the up from the down, why, we couldn't do it.
This possibility of having one without the other, it just is something that physics will not allow? Or is he saying B, not likely to exist, happen, occur in the physical universe? So not that it is impossible, but that it's unlikely to happen, or that he's giving some indication as to the likelihood of it happening? Or maybe C, he's saying that there is some logical difficulty when you try thinking about or justifying one without the other.
Because up goes with down, is unintelligible apart from down, in the same way that the head side of a coin goes together with the tail side.
kind of like morality, talking about objective moralities, just as theologians will tell atheists that there's some logical difficulty in their thinking about having objective morality.
Again, I don't think there's going to be any difference of opinion between Bill and me on the question, do non-theists believe in morality? Of course we all believe in morality. It's whether or not there could really be something. Am I, as an atheist, entitled to talk about right and wrong as something that genuinely exists without having God? So that's the question I'm going to focus on, not whether, people talk this way, whether the atheists talk this way, but whether there's some logical difficulty about their talking that way.
So there is some logical difficulty with it. And then D, maybe what's meant is that there is some social commitment to conceal or discourage or disallow the possibility of thinking, talking, or acting as though we can have one without the other. I seriously doubt Alan Watts is talking about D. I mean, so much so that I wasn't even sure I should write it, but for completeness sake. But what is he saying? Is he saying A, B, or C? That it's impossible to happen in the physical universe? Or that it's unlikely to happen in the physical universe? Or that there's some logical difficulty in talking about having one without the other? The logic here is that we could say one of these is correct, or we could say more than one of these is correct. So that more than one of these being correct, like A, B, and C being correct, or A and C, or B and C, or A and B, these possibilities have to also be accounted for.
And so in this way, we as individuals, as separate beings, are really inseparable from the whole natural environment in which we live. We go together.
So I don't really know what to make of this claim yet. So claim 3, without things, there would be no world. And again, just like the logic of this claim, without what we call the whole world, there would be no things.
Without what we call things, there would be no world. But without what we would call the whole world, there would be no things.
But what does he mean by things? So a thing, according to Alan Watts, as I understand him, is a unit of thought.
Every point of view that we've taken, the point of view of the cells, the point of view of the man hovering above the earth in a flying saucer or an aeroplane, is a correct point of view. And according to the way in which we look, so we divide the things of the world. For you see, it's interesting, isn't it, that the word thing is very like the word think. Because by breaking down our world into things is the way in which we think about it. We break down what we call the material world into objects and assign to those objects the kind of words we describe as nouns.
And that way, when you describe it, a unit of a thing, a noun, it's kind of using the definition to self-refer to the thing it's trying to describe. A thought is technically a thing, because a noun is a person, place, or thing, right? So stuff is basically a unit of stuff. That's not maybe the best definition or the most applicable way of laying it out in definitional form.
And then the world of action we break into events and assign to events the kind of word we call verbs.
Maybe a better way is talking about it as a verb, as an activity, as a process.
But things and events are fundamentally the ways of breaking up our complex world so that we can think about it.
So a thing is a unit of thinking. This is a better definition if you use it as a verb, I believe Alan Watts has said before. So if we understand this claim, I think we would be in a better position to understand Alan Watts's metaphysics of the physical universe and maybe his thoughts on consciousness.
If you can't have the perception of a figure without a background, if you simply cannot see it, if there is no background there, doesn't that mean that the background and the figure are some way inseparable? They're different, yes, but they're inseparable differences. And so in this way, we as individuals, as separate beings, are really inseparable from the whole natural environment in which we live. We go together, and you cannot have the one without the other.